Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, an Italy travel podcast. I'm Darcy Melton.
And I'm Nathaniel Malor.
And today we are talking about Italy in the headlines, January edition.
We are. Well, actually, technically, this one's coming out. Isn't it coming out tomorrow, December 31st?
Yeah, it is.
This will be. So Happy New Year's to all of you. Happy New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's to all of you listening. We hope that your 2026 will be wonderful and beautiful and amazing and filled with light and happiness.
Enjoy.
Enjoy.
Which is pretty much the same as happiness, but I needed to add something.
Yeah. But it's like you can get both. Happiness and joy. If you can get them both. I think that's what you could do. And also welcome back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah.
After last
week we had some reruns of it was actually our first, we reran a two-part, basically, of what was originally recorded as one-part episode. The point of this is that was our first episode of 2025.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really neat. Oh, what a fun way to kind of end 2025.
We didn't even realize that. I only realized it whenever I was putting up the episodes.
Yeah, because that was just something for like basically winter / Christmas time sort of pastries, like things that are traditional around this time of year. So we thought it'd be kind of fun to listen to. But what a nice little tidy bow that is.
I know, isn't that fun? Coincidental. So now we're going to be talking about news and headlines and also things coming up that will affect your trip potentially in January, right?
Yeah, we will probably continue this monthly headlines. It might become slightly more frequent depending, but already now that we're entering the new year, it seems like there are already some articles talking about how tourism is going to be affected in 2026. So we kind of wanted to go ahead and get a jump on it. So some of these will be probably more tourism related than normal, just because that's kind of the season we're heading into. I mean, I know it's just December and almost January, but it just means like, I don't know, it's usually always like February, March when you start getting those articles about like, is Italy, breaking up with tourism and does Italy hate tourists? So we wanted to kind of go ahead and start setting some of the groundwork, and making it so it's, I don't know. So we are talking about this from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that nobody's freaked out when they see those yearly headlines of why tourism is so bad, which, like you're saying, inevitably happens in around the early springtime.
Exactly. Before we get started, though, just want to say thank you to everyone who has been, well, now that this is the last episode of the year, thank you to everyone who followed, who found us this year, who started listening along, who followed along, who's just been part of the journey. We really do genuinely appreciate it. It means a lot to us. I think this was our first full year. I think 2024 is the first. I think in May of 2024 we started doing weekly episodes in sort of some fervency, if you will, like some actual like weekly. But 2025 is the first full year of doing so, and it's just been a lot of fun. And we really appreciate you all taking your time to listen to us and to enjoy us and to leave comments and feedback and to reach out if you have questions or just to reach out to say thank you for making the podcast, because sometimes, as we've mentioned in the past and even more recently, it can feel like you're sort of talking into a void a little bit. Even though like, oh, the number goes up, it doesn't like, it's like, oh, but I don't know who's listening. Are these just bots listening? Are these real people? So it's really cool to hear when some of y'all do reach out and say, have a question or say thank you or anything like that. We really do appreciate it. So thank you all so much from the bottom of our hearts for listening, for following, for leaving reviews.
Thank you all so much. Sorry, I wanted to say thank you, but I didn't want to interrupt you, Nathaniel. So thank you all so much. And if you're new here, welcome. And you can follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can contact us at onlybag.com. And you can also find us on Instagram, where you can contact us if you have any questions about your upcoming trip or just want to say hi or anything like that.
And that's Only Bag Podcast, I believe.
Thank you. Yes.
We also have a website, onlyabag.com, where you can find a bunch of articles. And we are rolling out this new little first time to Italy walkthrough sort of guide, where it just sort of is going to, because we realize some of you who listen to this podcast series, this podcast in general, are first timers to Italy. So at the recommendation of one of our listeners, we decided to put it all in a little area. So if just like planning your trip, things to keep in mind, what to know before you go, things you can easily refer back to. Basically, you just have bookmarked on your phone or on your computer, so if you ever kind of feel like, man, I think there was something I read about this, you can always have an easy place rather than kind of searching through the website, trying to figure out, what, if it was an article, if it was a podcast episode or something like that. We're just trying to have it all easily searchable. So
Yeah,
that's
because
all.
traveling in general,
Yeah.
as I'm sure y'all know if you have traveled, is extremely stressful. Even
Absolutely.
if you're having a so-called vacation, it's very stressful. And especially if you're traveling for the first time, planning it can feel completely overwhelming. So we wanted to have a landing page, as like you said, Nathaniel, suggested by a listener, so that things are a little less stressful. You always have a landing page to go back to and sort of find what you were looking for. We want to make things
Exactly.
as less, what is it? The least stressful possible.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is English?
That's exactly it, though. That's exactly it. And so if you've enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support us, you can do so through Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/onlyabag, where you can leave a donation. Or if you are planning your trip to Italy and you are purchasing like hotel rooms or purchasing train tickets, anything like that, tours, you can use our affiliate links. Some of them will be in the description. Some of them are on the website. And every affiliate link you use that is ours, we get a small commission from the company who like we are representing in that case. Though we are not representatives of the company, we are just sort of, I guess.
The link that we give you,
Yes.
that company gives us a little kickback.
Exactly. That's the one.
And I apologize if you can hear my tummy grumbling. I think I suddenly got hungry and it's making a lot of noise. I don't know if y'all
Like
can hear it.
1:30 on the dot, and your stomach's like, and now it's time to eat. Yeah. So I guess we'll just jump straight into the.
Speaking of food, let's talk about the food.
Let's talk about the food. What does that mean, though?
So Italy Italy just announced that their food heritage is recognized by UNESCO, right?
Yeah,
Did I say that correctly?
Yeah. So I believe it was 2023, the Italian government launched the initiative to have their. It's one of UNESCO. My understanding has essentially two different sort of branches: the tangible and the intangible. Tangible being something like Stonehenge, pyramids of Giza, Great Wall of China, things like that. These are like, this is a place you can go to, and it's just, this is part of a both global but also local heritage. If that makes sense, it's sort of like it's a basic way of saying this is important for everybody to recognize what this was or what this means to everyone. And then there's intangible, and I think, for instance, Italy's opera singing, Italian opera, is an intangible recognized. I think it's specifically they call it an intangible cultural treasure.
Okay.
And so it's like already opera singing for Italy is recognized as one of them. A lot of dance types of dancing around the world are recognized. Certain sports are recognized. So Italy had petitioned in 2023 to have their cuisine in general recognized. And it's a little bit weird. I will like just throw out, because it's not specifically dishes, because already a number of dishes of Italy are already recognized, including the art of pizza making, which was recognized some years ago. But this is more the idea of grandparents passing down recipes to grandchildren. This is the idea that like food follows a sort of a word of mouth type basis. It's also they talk about a lot of tradition, like the tradition of food's very old in Italy. So that's somehow an intangible cultural treasure.
Okay.
It's one of those weirdly worded things where it almost feels like, like the high school students making up something for extra credit. So it kind of feels like, oh, this is very like the thesaurus was well used in this application.
It's interesting to me. I mean, all of this is interesting to me. But whenever I first heard this, my first thought was, oh, super cool. Love it. That makes sense. But the more I read about it and kind of understand, I guess the more I understand that I don't understand, it's a lot more complex than I think I initially thought. Does that make sense?
I think that's it exactly. It, like, on the surface, it's like, cool, all Italian food is recognized. Thumbs up, high five. We all like pizza. But then as you look into it, it goes, oh, wait, what does that mean?
Right.
And I think that's where it doesn't fall apart necessarily, but it definitely raises questions. Italy, for example, claims to be the first country to have its cuisine recognized by UNESCO. However, France and Mexico, just to name two, have already had their cuisine recognized by UNESCO, not specifically just a dish, but the entirety of the cuisine. However, it's Italy's getting their tradition of cuisine recognized, whereas like I think French was the sort of the eating part, something about setting the table or something. It was very specific, not setting the table specifically, but like how it's served, like the certain courses are served or something. And I think Mexico had another part of so it wasn't all food in Mexico, but it was a specific part of their cuisine that was recognized. So Italy's saying we're now the first country to have all cuisine recognized, but it
That seems like semantics.
it seems very much like splitting a very fine hair. It's like, okay, but why not just be excited for it? Of course, this also did lead to, though, a number of counter arguments, for lack of a better word. And some of them, I think, hold water, some don't. For instance, for the Times, Giles, I never know how to pronounce that name, Giles.
I would say Giles.
Giles Corin, not Giles. I know, right?
I don't know. It's not
So
my name.
Corin, I'm just going to use his last name.
Okay.
Basically sort of tore this apart, basically saying like, this is ridiculous. This should not be allowed. Like, not should not be allowed, but this is just bad from the UNESCO World Heritage. This just doesn't make any sense. Some of the stuff he talked about, though, he's like, I've had plenty of bad meals in Italy. There's been rude waitstaff in Italy, and he also ended up with like, also all Italians hate English, which I don't think is remotely true at all. So I don't really know.
But also, what does that have to do with anything?
Well, part of this apparently does go back a little bit to earlier this year, where the UK website called Good Food, which is it's owned by BBC.
Okay.
They published an article talking about here's how to make a super simple, super easy, authentic cacio e pepe.
Okay.
It's a 4-ingredient dish. It's pasta, pepper, butter, and Parmesan. Darcy has a aghast face. I think speechless is the word.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, it led to some outcry here in Italy. The Italian Restaurant Association was very emphatic with their rebuttal, saying, no, it's a 3-ingredient dish, pasta, pepper, and pecorino cheese, pecorino romano, if you want to be specific about it, not Parmesan, and certainly not butter. And also, I think part of the same thing was like, you can also basically make it better with cream. And they were like, absolutely not. In fact, if you are making cacio e pepe, one of the ways that people make it creamy is through pasta water. The starch in the pasta water does help the cheese basically kind of thin nicely into a sauce and coat it well. Because sometimes if you just do cheese straight into the pasta, which is what sometimes they recommend, it can be really nice when it's hot.
Yeah, it can get a little globby rather than making a nice sauce.
Exactly. But if you use a very healthy amount of pasta water, it'll thin it out. So they basically, and their issue is that the BBC website did present this as an original dish rather than an experimental version of the dish. So that's
just wrong.
Yeah. So this guy, after...
also, easily researchable BBC and Good Food, whoever you are.
I think part of it too is the issue simply was, because I don't really know Good Food, I'm not familiar, but it sounds a bit like Bon Appetit, for example, the magazine or website. So it kind of sounds like maybe somebody submitted it and then I only say this too, not to let them off, or not to let them off too easy, but knowing Bon Appetit, it's like the editor for that is the editor for 4 other things.
That's true.
And they are also in charge of
There's too much on their plate, would you say?
I love that. I love that. There is too much on their plate. And so I think there's a bit of authentic, whatever, perfect. We'll publish it because it seems like a good. They also pitched it as a very easy to make recipe that like you could make in a pinch, basically. Like if you have nothing else.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. But don't pitch it as, or don't claim that it's the original version. That sounds like a very nice pasta.
Right.
I would eat that.
Right.
It's not the original cacio e pepe.
Actually, somebody in Rome said, we have that already. It's called a pasta alfredo. That's what pasta alfredo is. It's cream, cheese, pepper, and linguine. So he's like...
Cream, cheese.
Yes.
So, just so people don't think it's cream cheese.
It's not cream cheese. It's cream, cheese. Yeah, I should have clarified that. And I think it is like Parmesan or some type of sharp... I don't know.
I can't remember what alfredo is.
I don't think it's pecorino. I think it's more cow than sheep. So the same guy, though, who exposed, he also used the word exposed, by the way. He's like, we exposed your scam around cacio e pepe. So then he basically hands off our heritage. England, get over it. And then invited the king.
Who's this person?
He's the head of the Italian Restaurant Association.
Okay, got it.
He invited the king to Rome to have an authentic cacio e pepe to celebrate having their thing. It is. I feel like Italians have no interest in ever fighting until food's involved, and then it's very vicious. I feel like they're very like, I don't know. But it's this is all interesting to me because Giles Corin also took aim at, I think his name is Massimo Bottura. If you've ever seen Chef's Table on Netflix, the first ever episode is with Massimo Bottura, who is a 3 Michelin starred chef in Milan, outside of Milan. And one of the things he tries to do is push Italian cuisine because he says it's so traditional. He's like, it's so stuck in the mud. And he, like, even recently he was talking about, we need to be done with we need to move beyond pasta. What else can we do? What else can we create? Because people, when he meant first open his restaurant, he would talk about like almost no one would come when they realized they didn't have traditional things on the menu. Interestingly, though, moving to a different argument that holds more weight in my mind is a guy named Alberto Grandi, I think it is. Apparently, I just named him Al Grandi.
That was my mistake. We have a shared note page, and I accidentally typed something, and it auto-corrected his name.
Okay, I was wondering. I was like, I thought I typed in Alberto. That makes sense. Or Al to his friends. Alberto Grandi. You might have seen it if you read The Guardian. This was quite recently. He published a opinion piece. Basically, he's a food writer and a university professor in the University of Parma, and he's often apparently what it seems like he's what a lot of English newspapers will go to when they need somebody to weigh in from Italy on something food related. So he tends to be the go-to person for this. So of course The Guardian, I guess, asked him to weigh in on it, and his response is a lot more measured. He also, again, Giles Corn is English, so he's coming at it from I went there, I didn't think the food was very good. What's the difference between cacio e pepe in Rome, as I think he used like Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or somewhere in America, which argued, I mean, if you have sheeps, that's not it. If you have sheep in Pittsburgh who make cheese, who can make pecorino cheese from, and the same black pepper you can get anywhere else, and the same pasta that you can even import.
Yeah, of course, you could make almost the same version if you follow the original recipe, if you're trying to make it the original
And
kind.
I think that was his argument, was food. I think Corin's argument was sort of summing up with, you can't necessarily call something your cuisine when it's something that can be made anywhere around the world for the same ingredients, which I thought was kind of like...
Yeah, but that's...
I know,
but a
right?
recipe comes from somewhere.
That was kind of the thing. It's like, you can't just put tomatoes in pasta and call it tomato sauce and then be like, that's our thing, when anybody can do it. I'm like, anybody can do it. But it's the same thing, I think, with art, for example. Like, anyone can, whatever it is, paint a blue line on a white background. But as soon as what's-his-face did it, shows you my modern art. The fellow who painted with like oil paint and very thin layers, diluted with turpentine, doesn't matter. He's sort of very modernist. Darcy has a very confused expression. You're the artist.
Yeah,
but I brought him up, so this is my fault.
If it's modern and he's a dude, I don't know.
In my head, it's his name starts with a D or an H, which is super useless to everybody listening. I apologize; it's already gone too long. So, anyway, my point is, when someone does a sort of very simple sort of thing, you think, I could have done that.
Dada, right?
No, it's
isn't that an architectural? It's not Dada.
Ism. Yeah. It's not that, though.
We've taken a turn from...
I apologize.
Sorry,
that was me.
Yes.
That was me. It was just to show that, like, I think when you do something simple and you think, oh, I could have done that, it's like, but you didn't. That was kind of the argument a lot in art. So I think it's the same thing with against Corin. It's like, well, anybody could have done that. It's like, right, but they didn't. They
didn't. And also on this, I don't know if he was defending the what the website you said? Not Good Eats. Good.
It was Good Food, I believe.
Food. If they didn't actually have the original recipe, then that is an example of how things can get changed and be called the original.
Right.
It's like, I think Mexican food, quote unquote Mexican food, like where we're from in the U.S., the food's not from there. But when people call something Mexican food in Savannah, Georgia, it's not always the authentic version of that original dish.
It is almost never.
It is almost, there are parts, I think, around Savannah where people may make, or like families who have roots in Mexico may make a much more authentic version of a dish. But then if you go to like a quote unquote Mexican restaurant in Savannah, you're probably not getting the real version of that dish. Doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's not that version. So
that being said, Chipotle is authentic Mexican food. I'm kidding.
Okay, I was looking.
You're like, I'm gonna have a fight right now.
So I think there's something to the fact, like, to acknowledging original recipes. That's all.
Well, I think it's the same argument that, I mean, just using the United States, for example, we have a very fine establishment called Olive Garden. I'm not sure if you're familiar. It is a chain of well-renowned, authentic Italian restaurants that serve free breadsticks and unlimited salad, I guess, if you purchase that, and what can only be described as some of the best Italian food, possibly in that 25 square meters they inhabit. And I think that not to make fun of Olive Garden, but I do think there's that sort of when something does get translated across like borders, for example, you do sort of, I mean, one, Olive Garden's a terrible example because you have to feed everybody something that everyone will enjoy. And that's where it gets really difficult. It's just like you can't like here because something could be really specific. It's like, well, I don't like that. Well, we have another dish really similar, but slightly different. And you might enjoy that more. But I think when Olive Garden can't do that, then you just sort of end up with, I mean, also all of their stuff comes out of bags from like, you know, Olive Garden Central or whatever it is. So again, this has gotten off topic. I apologize, y'all. No shade to Olive Garden. I do really like the free breadsticks. Point is, though, Alberto Grandi, who I will just call Grandi from now on because I don't want to, in case his name is like something else, Grandi, he was arguing that Italian cuisine was really only codified in the late 20th century, which is like the 80s and 90s, basically. He argued from the 50s and 60s, essentially forward, is when they started codifying certain dishes. This is post-World War II. We've already talked about pasta carbonara, which is, or alla carbonara, which is a Roman dish. Technically, it's the pasta with egg and in America, it's bacon. In Italy, it's guanciale, which is pig cheek.
Or pancetta sometimes.
Or pancetta. That is a major argument in Italy.
Okay.
Guanciale or pancetta. I think the original is guanciale.
That makes sense.
But not everywhere has and or uses guanciale. So I think
not
pancetta.
Like every region has access to guanciale.
I think they have access. I think it's more just it's not common in a dish. So it's just sort of like
people will substitute.
Exactly. Okay. Like you keep pancetta in the house. We don't keep guanciale. And Alberto Grandi argued that basically the advent of, not even the advent, the proliferation of refrigerators in everybody's house made it so no longer were families basically saying, well, when I buy meat on Tuesday, we have to use it by Wednesday or it's going to go old, or I have to use cheese and I bought 300 grams of cheese. That's 50 grams a day. If we, blah, blah, blah. He's like, now you can just go down to the cheese store where it's all refrigerated and get more. You can go to the butcher shop where it's all refrigerated and get more. And you can bring it home and put it in your own refrigerator. So all of a sudden there's access to things they might not have had in the 20s and 30s. He also argued that a lot of the migration out of Italy was due to scarcity and famine and hunger. This is the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he's arguing, like, do you think people to the left had access to tortellini and lasagna? That is where I do find umbrage with it. I'm not a food researcher. However, you can still have a traditional dish and then no longer have money to make that traditional dish, so you go somewhere else to buy. One actually comparison is, I think it's jollof, Jollof is how you pronounce it. The rice in Nigeria, the rice dish in Nigeria. Apparently, it is becoming more. It used to be a staple. It is now becoming more something that is eaten rarely because of how expensive it is to make, just based on price of like tomatoes and things that would go in it. Wow. So people are substituting other ingredients in it, and no longer is it considered jollof rice. It's just considered some other sort of creation rice. But I thought that was interesting. This is the same thing. You can't argue that it's not part of.
It doesn't just stop existing.
Exactly. It's not like no longer part of Nigerian cuisine or Nigerian heritage. It's just simply we don't have the money to make it how we used to. So like we don't have the money to make lasagna anymore. It doesn't mean that the 20 years you stopped making lasagna, it no longer is your lasagna. So he was arguing that these Italians would go to America, see ingredients they have never seen before, make new dishes and bring them back. Apparently anthropologists call this the rebound effect, where you I think people leave, make something, bring it back, and then that place they brought it back to gets credited with the discovery.
Do you have any examples of that?
I do not.
Okay.
That would have been super smart to write down.
I just can't think of anything that, I mean, again, like you said, I'm also not a food researcher, so I don't know what those dishes would be.
I don't think it's dishes. Dishes of food.
Yeah.
Oh, I think spaghetti and meatballs. I think some people make the argument for pizza. That's not true, because pizza is definitely brought over and then brought back. But like, there's a lot of examples of people in America Italians in America trying to recreate pizza, but using like lard instead of olive oil, for example.
Because like Napolitano pizza wasn't brought back from
exactly.
The
no, that was
Americas.
already there.
Okay.
Yeah. So it seems more like the spaghetti meatball type. It could be things with cream if that wasn't well used. But that's where kind of I do again take umbrage with this, is because it doesn't seem as clean as I think he were to allow it to be. It's also certain dishes, as we've talked about. I mean, some people say, for instance, tomatoes in Italy. Obviously, they're not endemic. Is that where when something grows in a place? Indigenous. That makes more sense.
Endemic? I don't know.
They're not indigenous to Italy at all. They were obviously brought over from, I believe, Mexico. So they've only had, tomatoes here since like 1700s, depending on, I guess, your financial status and whether you could afford tomatoes or not. However, apparently Italy is credited with creating a number of different cultivars that are used today. So, for instance, the San Marzano tomatoes, which is very specific.
Did you use the word cultivar?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I think it means, I was like, oh man, I hope I didn't misuse it. I think it means a different variety of a plant is a different cultivar.
Oh, cool. Okay, sorry.
And
Keep
I
going.
think, I don't know if it's specific, but I think it means, again, somebody listening who probably has a degree in botany is like, I do not mess this up, Nathaniel. Or maybe you're more encouraging that. Like, don't mess this up, Nathaniel. But I think it also means something that has to be cultivated for it to
Okay.
be a different cultivar. Not something we found a different cultivar. You didn't find a different cultivar, but you cultivated a different cultivar.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think they're credited with creating a number of different cultivars of tomatoes for like the yellow tomatoes, the San Marzano, this, that, the other thing. Maybe not specifically yellow. I just mean like there are, if you are in Italy, you will go up and down and find 150 different varieties of tomatoes. And so everyone has this like, oh, that's the tomato of so-and-so. It's very specific. So that's what they're credited with. And then, bringing them into the dish where other countries, I think like Spain obviously uses tomatoes quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't know if any other Mediterranean country or I think Portugal as well uses them, but I'm not sure. Like, I can't think of any French dishes off the top of my head except maybe like ratatouille that uses.
It's like really tomato heavy.
That's super, exactly. Anything that's super tomato heavy. And some of that could just be they only have one chance to grow them during the year, like one growing season of tomatoes, not multiple ones. But either way, I thought that was interesting. Essentially, just his argument felt a little bit more authentic, which was it's only post-war when we had access to, and people were coming back saying, oh, Grandma, you wouldn't believe what we're having in America. If you combine this and this, you get this other great dish. However, again, I take a bit of umbrage with that because it seems like there are a lot of dishes, even I can't remember the local name for it, but it's beans and greens. I think it's fave a something. It's because it used to be fava beans and chicory greens or dandelion greens. And over time, it's become beans and escarole, which would have been more in the States, beans and escarole, which is still like a lot of Italian-American communities in the United States eat beans and escarole as a dish. But back in the home country, it might have been, or it still is, chicory greens or dandelion greens more frequently. So like it's certain things like that where I'm like, they might have changed ingredients going there, but they still had the dish. It's not like they created, cacio pepe in America. They still created it here and just went there and then had to recreate it. Maybe that's where they got the fettuccine Alfredo from and then brought that back. But you still had the combination of pasta and tomato, or pasta and cheese going over there kind of thing.
Yeah. I think there also is, we should mention, there is a heritage, like within each city, within each town,
Sure,
people vary recipes. And I think that's really important to people living here, whether it's an old dish from, pre the 20th century, pre the 16th century, that would have been much more what indigenous plants were growing, it would have come from that. Or if it's something from the 20th century, people still really cling to their local recipes. And I think that's super important culturally. And that should be acknowledged,
Oh, and it's interesting you say that, and I promise we'll move on from this for y'all listening. We just thought this might be interesting. But for example, one of the lines he used, and I think it was supposed to be kind of a glib, sort of just like cute line, and it was something about like, it was people who had bellies full of tortellini getting on the boats, but people who were tired of bad polenta. And I thought that was interesting because if I'm not mistaken, polenta is made with corn, and I could be mistaken. I want to look this up.
I think it is.
But anyway, so I basically said that people were tired of bad polenta, which I thought, one, it's a very northern thing to begin with. It is rare that you'll find polenta anywhere in the South. It is made, you're nodding, is it made with...
It is, I nodded too soon. Sorry. Keep talking.
Oh, okay. But
Cornmeal.
Okay.
Yes, it is
Beautiful,
made with corn.
beautiful work. It's one of those things, it's like in my head, I know it's made with corn, but it's not until you say it out loud that you're like, man, I might have just been assuming the wrong thing for like 10 or 15 years.
Well, isn't couscous made with some sort of pasta? It is.
It is, like, yeah, it's made with wheat. It's a pasta.
And that's what I always thought couscous was a different grain. So I think now that when I learned that, it made me second guess all the other things that I knew that were other grains.
It's funny
No
you say
offense,
that
couscous.
because growing up, my mom was like, do you want couscous or quinoa tonight with some dishes? And I'm like, oh, those are two different grains. Not, do you want pasta or quinoa tonight? Which
Yeah.
I'm like, is a much better way of, delivering that. So yes, no, with cornmeal, I mentioned that because corn obviously did not exist here prior to 1600s either. So it still like exists here, I guess, as polenta. And then like popcorn's very slowly catching on, but outside of that, corn is not like, I mean, some gluten-free pastas and stuff, but
Right. But
like,
it's not, especially where we are, it's not used in that many dishes at
yeah,
all. It
like
is
corn on the
quite rare.
cob or some sort of corn salad, or it doesn't sound good, but you know what I'm saying? Like we
We
sometimes,
brought cornbread to
oh, that was
a sort of like
people love
American
that.
Thanksgiving celebration one year here. People were astonished. They
Yeah.
loved it. They thought it was wild.
I made the kind with corn in it as well. So it's cornmeal and then bits of corn. And people thought it was going to be disgusting. And everybody seemed to love it. I mean, people went back for seconds, which is how I know. It's like, you guys are lying if you just had one bite and you said that was really good. You go back for seconds. I know you're not lying. But no, I was just simply saying,
Polenta's a very bad example. I think you could say people were tired of beans.
well, that was the thing. Because I'm like, polenta is something that is already new. It's already kind of a very, not bad at all. It's a very bland sort of. I mean, it's like people are tired of unsalted pasta. It's like, yeah, there's not much else going for it. No offense. Like people like buttered noodles are a thing, but noodles without anything on them, not like a thing really anywhere. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
maybe
just, yeah, polenta's just a bad example, I think.
that's the, and I was also thinking around Umbria, for example, very famous for lentils, going back to the Etruscan period. I'm thinking of even Matera that's famous for lentils, going back thousands of years. So I'm thinking lentils could be an interesting option, or beans, as you said, or other things that people are eating. But again, these are all still dishes, and this is all still part of the heritage. I think actually one thing we were going to talk about eventually, we never really did, was how I think this time of year people eat lentils and greens to signify good luck and money, because it's for the new year, instead of in the South, in the States, we have black-eyed peas and collard greens to also signify money and luck.
Something like that, yeah. I think so.
So I think the same thing, but lentils and again, I think it's trichoria or broccoli or something like that. So all that being said, is I just thought that was an interesting way of agreeing with what you were saying earlier, which was like 10 minutes ago. I apologize, on the fact that no, just like it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard to kind of put a finger on the whole situation. It's cool that UNESCO like recognizes Italian cuisine, and I get the argument against it, because it's like, okay, some of these dishes are new and some of these dishes are not Italian. Like pasta and meatballs, as we've mentioned, I think on an episode like last year or 2 years ago, is not an Italian dish. There are meatballs here, more frequently served in like soup than anything else, and then
Or just like a sauce kind of by
or a
themselves.
sauce by themselves, and then there's pasta, but combining them was very much an American invention. So I think there's some room for that, if that makes sense.
I think the question too is, my two thoughts are, many Italians, certainly the Italians that we know, are very passionate about food, even in a sort of passing way. Like whenever you're eating, oftentimes what you're talking about is the food,
Yeah.
you know? And so that is not to be ignored. But I think another question is, does recognizing Italian cuisine as a whole by UNESCO take away the sort of passion about cuisine from other countries?
Sure. No, I mean, I think that's a totally valid question. It also is too. It's just there are countries, I think, with much longer histories of very unchanged cuisine. For example, I think Japan has some. I don't know if it's recognized dishes or recognized cuisine as well. But again, that's a much longer history of the same ingredients, the same preparation over hundreds of years rather than 70 years. For either case, though, I mean, it's also Italy takes it as Italy's big on that whole soft power thing, that soft political power. It's just in the sense of, tourism, or in the sense of food. They're like, the more exports, the more things that people love about us, the more likely it is that we'll be here in 200 years.
Yeah.
So it seems kind of an interesting, an interesting way of sort of, I don't know, collaborating with the world around you.
Yeah, true. So moving from the dinner table to
The rest
other
of the
parts
house.
of the house, shall we move into a different topic? We're running a bit long, but we're going to keep on going. Let's talk about housing. And
That's
the
always a
housing
fun
crisis.
topic for everybody. Housing and housing crisis and housing plans. I think I mentioned this one at the end of 2 weeks ago. There's maybe 3 weeks ago. I mentioned I wanted to talk about it, but the EU was supposed to release their plan later that afternoon. So when we sat down to record, we didn't have the information. And I wanted to do this because a lot of it are one of the points, the sore points, as we've mentioned time and time again, is short-term vacation rentals, Airbnb, VRBO, or things on Booking and whatnot that are just short-term vacation rentals, just rented out through there as if they are hotels. And I was curious to know how the EU was going to approach this, if that makes sense. So I guess I mean, there's no real, we don't have a real easy breakdown for this, but I figured it's just something interesting. And I wanted to end with how it's going to affect you, if that makes sense. You
Yeah.
being the listener, I'm pointing at Darcy, but I meant you, the listener. So do you want to start?
Yeah. So let's start with some statistics just to get our
Yeah,
minds wrapped
yeah.
around it. So, 7 to 10, there are 7 to 10 million empty or underused homes
In Italy.
in Italy.
Okay.
And basically, when we think about that, it's a lot of buildings that are not in city centers. They are in places like where Nathaniel and I live, for example. They are places not necessarily suburbs, but small towns in the countryside that end up being sprawling.
Yeah.
And a lot of these are unused for various reasons. Some of those are there aren't enough jobs anymore in these small towns to sustain people living in these unused houses.
For sure. Yeah.
Another thing is that over the years, these homes, which would have been family homes most likely, have gotten a bit run down. And it's just not really sustainable for a lot of people to put in all the money and time that it would take to get these houses back to a sort of modern living order. It's too expensive for them.
It's also, if I may add in on that, it's not just expensive to get it to be back in a livable situation, but there's some law, sort of like in the United States, because I only know this because your mom recently redid her bathroom 2 or 3 years ago. And I assume it's the same law kind of anywhere, but in the United States, if you were to redo a bathroom, you have to bring it up to ADA standards,
Compliance, yeah.
the compliance, thank you, the American Disabilities Act. You have to make sure that it essentially, the doorway is wide enough to accommodate a standard wheelchair. There's X amount of space on either side of the toilet. There's X amount of space between the toilet and the sink, the whole 9 yards. In Italy, well, I don't actually know if there's any rules around the bathroom at all, except for the fact I think a bidet does need to be put into every new bathroom.
And there's standard width for where the bidet has to be compared to the toilet, I think compared to the sink, compared to the shower.
Yeah. But the big one is earthquake proof. A lot of houses in Italy, especially where we are in earthquake zones. So anytime you renovate the house, not anytime, but past a certain point, you have to. I know that any new construction needs to be earthquake proof, and if you were to do certain adjustments to a house, certain renovations to a house, you essentially need to to earthquake proof the house. You can't just like, oh, we're going to do a whole new kitchen, a whole new bathroom, a whole new living room. They're like, if you're doing that much structural changes, you're going to have to earthquake proof the house, which for a lot of people is quite expensive. It's also for a lot of people make the argument of, and I think I don't know how an erroneous argument it is, but to say if this house survived the 1980 earthquake that knocked down everything else, it goes to show that it's going to survive any earthquake. But I think other people say no, it barely survived the 1980 earthquake, which means it's going to come down in a stiff wind. So there's two ways of looking at it, but I only mention that because sometimes these underused houses are, again, not necessarily up to code. However, they are technically livable with a coat of paint. They have plumbing, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We took a brief pause for me to cough, and now I think I sound a little more normal. But no, that's absolutely true. It is not affordable for a lot of people to do what's necessary to make a home up to code and or livable. So there are, and I think it makes houses even, like houses sit empty because people can't afford to renovate them, to bring them up to code. And then that sort of decrepitness continues in the house.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and that's exactly, it's like then you're not replacing the roof, or nobody's in there to notice when the roof starts leaking, or nobody's in there to notice when something bad starts happening and destroying the house.
Exactly. And so before I said that some statistics say that 7 to 10 million houses sit empty, La Repubblica recently did a study, and they think that 9.6 million houses out of a total 35 million, which they say exist in Italy, are sitting empty. And basically, like I said, a lot of those are in the countryside. And the sort of main issue that a lot of people think is the main issue is that there aren't enough available houses where life is happening.
Yeah.
And life is mostly happening in cities. So people are going to big cities because most of the jobs that exist and most of the new jobs are in law, doctors, universities is a big one. And so much of that happens in a city rather than outside. So there just aren't places in those densely populated areas. There aren't enough places there compared to the countryside.
It's interesting too. So it says that 35 million people, 35 million dwellings exist in Italy, and I'm curious because it's also 70. I think Italy's latest population is like 72 million people live in Italy. So it's just essentially it's like, I mean, obviously the population does include children who are living with parents in this case, but it's interesting where I'm kind of curious to know what the number is of like how many houses or how many dwellings you need per every
Person.
2, 3
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Like, is it 1 to 2, 1 to 3? But as you mentioned, I'm curious to know, because this is all throughout Italy versus in cities where I imagine there is a much greater disparity.
Yeah, and many more people living per apartment than, the two of us in a house. Another interesting statistic is that according to Eurostat, 75% of Italians own their own homes.
Okay.
But that's a misleading number because a lot of people have inherited their homes from their families, which is great. I love that. But going back to our previous argument, a lot of these houses aren't lived in because they are falling apart or because they're not anywhere near these people's jobs. So people could technically own a home. In fact, many people own a home that they don't live in.
I'm also like, for example, we have neighbors who are in their 60s. They still work. They're in their mid to late 60s. They are currently renting the house they live in, despite the fact they own a house in the same town that they live in. It's just they don't have the money, as you just said, to fix up and put it back together to make it livable. But it's livable in the sense of it has a roof, walls, a couple floors. It's not comfortable. It has technically water, but you have to redo all the pipes because it was put in the 50s or 60s. So it's like a little old. But it's that sort of example of here's somebody who rents where they live, owns a home where they live, but they don't live in the home that they own, if that makes sense. And they aren't like renting it out either, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, but like it's just not contributing to, again, the statistic of, yes, technically it's an empty house, but it's not being used for anything. And so transitioning like away now from the statistics into how it affects you, and then I promise we will wrap this up, is I wanted to basically mention, as I mentioned, this Airbnb thing. Just now that we have the idea that there are empty houses, because later in a different episode, some point in January or February, we wanted to talk about over tourism / mass tourism versus poorly managed tourism and what that looks like. And especially because Italy is one of those countries that says we have over tourism or mass tourism. And while there is a lot of tourism, there is an argument to be made that it's not too much. It's just not managed in a way that, I don't know, it's almost like we talked about, like every year Italy's surprised by how many people come. And it's like, what happened between last year and this year? Did something change?
It's like the people living in these cities with tourists weren't surprised.
Yeah.
It was like the government was surprised.
Exactly. So part of what Italy just passed today, Tuesday, December 30th, I think is what we are, is they just passed their budget bill. It is a disaster of a budget bill for most people. I think part of it is
really bad, y'all.
Raising the retirement age, which is already, even though it's not a super high retirement age in general, you still have to work for like 40 something years to get the full benefits. And I think last time we talked about this, it was like you have to work from when you're 20 something, 21 till 40 to 61 to get the full benefits. Otherwise you only get partial benefits. And it's like, oh, so you just made that I have to now work more. People hate it. It's not happy. And one of the things in there, though, is talking about Airbnbs, specifically short-term vacation rentals. There was a initiative they wanted to pass, basically taxing everybody at 26% on their income of Airbnbs, because they're like, it's no longer, I think it used to fall under like the pension type of tax bracket, where under a certain amount you didn't have to pay taxes on because, oh, you're just having somebody at your home. We're not going to get involved.
A pensione really, to me, is like a mom and pop B&B.
Yeah.
It's if a person has their home and they let people come stay with them, they provide breakfast. It really is a B&B.
It's a bed and breakfast. And in the States or even in England, and I don't, like, I'm thinking the States and England have a history of bed and breakfasts. I think Italy has the history of the pension instead.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like you go, you stay, you get breakfast in the morning, and then you're out. And I mean, a lot of backpackers in the 90s and 80s and 90s used them because they were super cheap. For €5 or €6 a night, you could stay. And that was kind of part of it. And I think when it transitioned to Airbnbs, it just, one of the major things that changed is no longer were people living there.
Right.
All of a sudden you could own the property, not be there, and
just rent out rooms.
Exactly.
Without someone kind of overseeing anything or providing any services really at all.
Well, especially if the pension was renting out rooms to people like staying, like I know we've seen a lot of apartments that are for rent for people who are working only in the winter, for example. So it's like a short-term vacation rental in the summer and then a normal apartment for 6 months of the winter, basically. So I think I don't know if pensions were also doing that, but it's now, so what passed is it's a 21% tax bracket or tax on your first house that you use for a short-term vacation rental, 26% on your second, and it goes up from there on your third, fourth, or fifth. So that means for companies who own multiple, you can't get away from saying, oh, I only have one under this company. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
If the companies own multiple now, like it doesn't seem like there's a cap either. So if you own 15 of them, it's like a 90% tax bracket at that last one. So it's kind of just dissuade people from owning multiple.
Okay.
But it's a bit soft for a lot of people who are still saying that doesn't solve the issue of it at all.
Right.
Like yeah.
Was there a date on that you mentioned off mic that this is going to be happening, or it's like this tax year?
This tax year is when it starts.
Got it.
And it might and part of the reason it affects you is obviously shouldn't affect you at all, but it might mean that there are fewer Airbnbs if people decide to close up their second or third or fourth Airbnb. It might mean there is a sudden dip in Airbnbs or short-term vacation rentals on Booking, because this specifically covers any apartment or house or anything rented in any web portal. Okay. So I guess it doesn't cover anything rented on the back of a magazine. I'm not really sure, but I think what they're trying to say is, you can't like, oh, I only rent it out through I don't know, Instagram or something like that. Right. Like, doesn't matter. It still is a short-term vacation rental. They are instead trying to focus on essentially creating housing opportunities. So for young people, for elderly, for students, for families.
Right, because one of the biggest problems we talk about with Airbnbs, and if you've listened to the podcast before, you know that we've talked about this, is that Airbnbs take up the space of where a resident of that city or town would normally be living. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No,
so it takes away from available housing for regular people.
And they're part of the way they're trying to fight this, change this. Again, and I want to get into in a second is what other cities or countries are doing, just because I think everyone's waiting for somebody else to make the first step. Is the energy I'm getting from everything that's been published, both this Italian budget bill that passed recently and the EU's own housing plan for the future or something like that. But essentially, Italy wants to introduce things like subsidized rent or rent to own or like cohabitation. So they want to introduce, they're like, can we explore other avenues of possible ownership or possible rental situations that aren't as cut and dry, basically. Because again, a lot of even places in Rome that are not that expensive to rent in a global sense, like, okay, it's $800 a month to rent, but that might sell for 600,000 or 700,000 euros. So that means owning one of those is going to be well outside of most people's means, but renting it is not. So they're trying to figure out is there a way we can kind of bridge that gap so more people are, because it used to be a thing too, in the 80s and 90s, you'd go to school somewhere, you really enjoy living in Naples, so hey, I'm going to buy someplace in Naples. I'm going to stay here and become, a Napolitano rather than going back home. But now what's happening is a lot of people go to school and then come back home because it's, once you age out of the not the barracks, what are they called, the dormitories?
Yeah.
Then you do move back to where it's cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. And even whenever we were researching this, I found, and I knew this already, we both did, but if you're a student somewhere, especially if you're a young person working in a city, potentially, you probably can't afford, or you might not be able to afford to live there. So there are some students, some young people, some people no matter their age, who work inside of a city or study inside of a city, but have to live in a town outside and commute to their work or study, right?
Yeah, no, and we actually even talked about this. For instance, one of the easiest ways to get Italian residency is to become a student. There are a lot of Italian universities that do English programs, that do English degrees. They have a pretty high rate of acceptance. You do not need a crazy high GPA. It's also quite affordable in terms of some of them are free-ish and some of them are not that much. Not John Cabot University. Those are American prices for American universities. But the Italian universities have it's affordable. I think it's within $9,000 a year or something. Plus, you have to prove that you have living expenses, but you are allowed to work in Italy on a student visa. However, as you just mentioned, even if you're coming with money, is still renting a place in the middle of a city center to get that's close to your school, that's also close to a job, isn't necessarily possible. So you might be basically finding yourself in a pretty bad sort of living situation where you're just I'm an hour away from everything. This is not where I wanted to be. The changes I wanted to mention as well as other cities. You probably have already seen some of this before. In like Barcelona, for example, they want to start phasing out all Airbnb or all short-term vacation rentals by 2028. It started already, I think, with canceling new licenses and then slowly kind of cutting back the licenses that exist. I don't know how they've been doing that or what their process is. I don't know if it's a lottery system each year until 2028. I don't know. Did I say 2026 before?
I'm not sure.
Oh, 2028. If I said 2026 on accident, I apologize. 2028. So I'm not sure what their process is, but essentially they're saying like, time to sell the property if you want to sell it, time to figure out something else. We're not going to do this overnight, but eventually
Time
we're
to
going to
find long-term renters.
yeah, time to find long-term renters. But we're going to do this, and I think people are waiting for. I know Barcelona is on like kind of on the cutting edge of this, if you will, because they are one of the highest sort of rates of basically the non Barcelonians.
I don't know what they call themselves.
Barcelonistas. I don't know. People who are from Barcelona, they have a very low rate of people who live there in the city. They all live outside. So they're saying we need to like return this because this was once a vibrant city. It's now just a shell and tourists. I think people are waiting to see how that goes and how poor it is. I know that I think this year Florence has already restricted new short-term vacation rental license. It doesn't really affect that much. It just means you can't have more, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I also know Spain, which is where Barcelona is located, not Florence, did just fine Airbnb, I think recently in the last few months, because they were advertising banned properties that didn't have a license, were not allowed to think. So rather than finding the house, the people in the house, they're actually finding the company saying, you need to moderate this better.
Yeah,
if you're going to have
and they do.
And they do, yeah. So it's like if you're
Meaning they do need to, not that they don't moderate these things better.
right. No, and that's the thing they basically, and I know that people seem to hate Airbnb in terms of like it seems like people who rent through Airbnb hate the fact that they're never sided with when something goes wrong. Mm-hmm. And then the people who rent out through Airbnb have the same issue. They're like, if somebody trashes my house, unless I have cameras everywhere, I'm still in trouble. And it goes the other way. People are like, I got there and they blamed me for something that had already been broken, even though I have pictures. So it seems like everybody sort of hates Airbnb. Mm-hmm. Just for what it's worth. It seems like this is compounding it. But the only other two things I want to mention is Italy is exploring a possible capping of nights in short-term vacation rentals. They have not put forward any numbers. They have not put forward what that means yet. I mean, it's an interesting thing because you and I have used Airbnb in the past actually only for long-term rentals, because Airbnb, at least outside the United States, we've noticed, because I've never seen this in the United States, but outside of the United States, it seems like there are a lot of Airbnbs that do a 50% off if you rent for at least 4 weeks. So I know when we were in between apartments, but we're like, we need to live somewhere, we would rent through Airbnb for an entire month. And we were getting pretty close to what was local renting prices, essentially. Right. So it seems like that would be cut entirely if it's going to cap the number of nights, unless they're going to cap no more than 4 nights, but you can do more than 28 nights.
I don't know how that would fix any problems.
Again, this is what a lot of people...
ultra short-term rental.
Also, and that's so people are kind of arguing like, how does that fix? What would that be fixed? Is it just making it more of a pain for Airbnb? Like, because now all of a sudden people who, instead of doing laundry every 3 days, I have to now do laundry every 2 days. It's just more of a pain for people, so they don't do it.
I don't that just kind of seems to come from left field. Like no one asked for that, and it was a bad suggestion.
Well, no, it's the same, and I think we've talked about this. I think that Venice fee as well is the same thing. Like people are like, we need to do something to limit tourism. And everyone's like, what about a fee? And everyone's like, that was not what we asked for. That is not helpful in the slightest. No.
The thing that it consistently, to me, as a person on the outside with no experience in any of this, it always seems to come down to the government and people making policy aren't listening to the regular people who are living with this day to day.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's just, and I think that's actually they doing this budget meeting now in Italy. It says that's their major argument is like, you just made it so much harder for everybody at the bottom. Like people now have to work longer. You've raised the minimum wage, but by so little that it doesn't actually change things to be day to day. But like, especially after COVID, the price of everything has shot up, and like pasta, which is a staple, obviously, or cleaning supplies, or anything that was once like, this is our weekly purchase, is now our every other week purchase, or every 2 weeks purchase. And I think somebody's statistic was, while you and I have found no problems with the healthcare because we're relatively young and have relatively few issues, in other regions that are much more overworked, people have just given up on healthcare entirely because they're just like, I can't, like, I can't get to where the healthcare is, or the waiting list is too long for the problem I have, or I have to go private, I can't go public. So they're like, instead of addressing these issues, you've instead addressed issues that nobody asked you to address, and you've done it poorly. So it kind of seems like an interesting, thing. But the last thing I wanted to mention is something we've actually talked about before on this podcast, is the key boxes and keypads to get into your apartment or
Your short-term rental.
your short-term rental, or what you might have thought was a hotel, because we stayed at a place called Hotel So-and-so in Salerno, and we get there and realize that even though they have a front desk, that is just like for show, and you do use a keypad and key box to get into the whole thing. As of December 2024, they are illegal.
Which is not widespread knowledge.
Which
we
is
did
not
not know that until we were researching for this episode.
Almost a year later. Actually, a year later, practically, because we mentioned this in April, we went to Matera and how to use a key box. And then I think in September we went and actually talked about this on the podcast. We went to Salerno and we talked about how much of an issue it is that you use the keypad to get into the hotel, the apartment, and then another keypad to get into your specific room. And one of the reasons they're making this this is illegal is because there's no check to make sure the person who's getting into the hotel is the same person who booked the hotel.
And there's also no checks on whether that establishment frequently changes their key codes or changes it with every person. So ostensibly, someone could pass along that key code and then anyone has access to this property.
And that's the thing. So they're apparently law officials are supposed to go around and check for this. It seems to be maybe only happening in more big cities, or if somebody puts up a stink about it kind of thing. I'm not really sure. There are also arguments of people saying, well, now how do I check in at some place at like 2 a.m? And it's supposed to be just like a hotel. Someone's supposed to be there, because already the other thing they're changing, which already requires somebody being there, is it used to be you could send a picture of your passport to the hotel or to the Airbnb or to the owner, and they would forward it onto the police department, because essentially anybody renting in Italy, doesn't matter how long or short, has to have their information passed on to the nearest police department so they know who's staying in the city, essentially. It also helps a lot for if something goes wrong, you have a proof saying, I actually was staying here. You guys know that, you have it on file.
Yeah, makes sense.
So they've now made it so the person has to physically copy the document rather than have a picture sent to them.
Which is usually what happens at hotels. If there's a front desk somewhere and someone works at that front desk, typically they take your document,
they do a photocopy or whatever.
Yeah, photocopy, exactly.
And make sure it looks like you on it. And then, because that's the other thing, if I were to send them on a WhatsApp, they would have no idea it looks like me.
They don't ask for a live video of you, which would be weird if they asked for a live video of you and a picture of your document. That would feel weird, but it's closer to actually seeing somebody and making sure they're the same person with that document.
And they said it was to combat terrorism, which feels... they should have just like combat crime, because I feel like it's going to be much more likely it's used to like break into these rooms and steal things than it is for terrorism. But that was the reason.
Terrorism seems like a stretch.
That was kind of the thing. I'm like, unless, I don't know. I'm like, it just seemed like, but I get the idea. It was like this, again, going back to the idea that the person booking it and the person who sends in their passport does not have to be the same person who actually is physically there. And of course, that person who is physically there to have, like, you could be like, oh, that was not me. I never got on the flight. I never actually made it there. So they have no way to link you to, the robbery of the Airbnb, basically. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're coming, that in theory, those late term check-ins, if you see like an Airbnb or something like that on Booking, like late night check-in, there's a key box. Those are technically illegal. I don't know how that affects you as somebody booking the thing. It should only affect the property. They're the only ones who get fined, but it's still something to keep in mind. And then there might be some other changes as to the sort of the limiting of nights, or maybe other people are going to follow Florence's lead and restrict the number of licenses passed out for short-term vacation rentals. This is all simple to say. I know this is a very long episode, that there are some changes in the pipeline this year, but I would almost expect them to be more, because I think next year, 2027, or next year, is an election year in Italy. So a lot of this is ramping up as people sort of I don't know, solidify positions. So a lot of this is going to start ramping up as people figure out what happened this year, and they're going to use it for a position for 2027, which all means that we might see some interesting in the sense of like also very much uncomfortable sort of changes as people like, we need to fight tourism, not tourism, but over tourism or bad tourism this way. And it might lead to things that are like just hard for everyone to figure out. So as that happens, we will keep you all informed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's it for this episode.
that is it for this episode. That was a lot of info. It's great.
know. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was not too much.
And we're going to have even more info, hopefully a shorter episode,
Yeah.
we think, for Friday with more headlines.
Yeah. So thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks for listening. Tanti abbracci.